I'm just waiting a half a
Sure.
minute for more folks to join. Hello, everybody. All right, well, hello. Thank you for joining us for our Research America Alliance webinar. And we have a wonderful guest with us today. But before that, just a quick reminder that if you're not a member, we'd love to have you join our alliance, and you can contact my colleague Joel. His email will be in the chat. We are so pleased today to have Dr. Caroline Montojo, who is the president of the Dana Foundation. Dr. Montojo will discuss highlights from the 2022 national survey we commissioned in partnership with her organization on brain health and brain health research. And additionally, she's going to shed light on the foundation's vision for a future in which brain science benefits from and reflects society. And she's going to share with us a number of the ethical issues that have come up as neuroscience research has developed, as well as some definitional issues. So we're really looking forward to this. She will share some slides, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So Dr. Montojo, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Jenny. I'll go ahead and pull up my slides right now. All right, and I'll put those in presenter view. So hopefully, can you see those okay?
Very well.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jenny, as well as Mary Woolley and the Research America team for the invitation to speak today. For those of you in the audience, my name is Caroline Montojo, and I am the president and CEO of the Dana Foundation. I'll share a little bit more about that in just a moment. A little bit about my own background. I am a neuroscientist by training, and previously I served as the Director of Life Sciences and Brain Initiatives at the Kavli Foundation based in Los Angeles, where I collaborated closely with scientists at the Kavli Institutes and leaders of the US Brain Initiative and the International Brain Initiative to Advance Science. I joined the Dana Foundation about 2 years ago to establish a forward-looking vision, mission, and organization for the foundation. I'll share a bit about the Dana Foundation now. So for those who are not familiar with the Dana Foundation, we are a private philanthropic organization based in New York City that was founded in 1950 by Charles A. Dana. He was an industrialist, legislator, and philanthropist. The foundation has a history in the 1950s through the 1990s, as you can see here, focusing on brick and mortar grants to small, independent, largely liberal arts colleges, as well as funding for health research, primarily in cancer, for example, for the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And then in the 1960s through the 1990s, the foundation supported education and training at colleges through Dana Scholars and Dana professorships, as well as targeted grants for Black and Hispanic students and faculty. And then in 1990 through 2000, the foundation supported educational innovations to improve K-12 public school. And it was in the 1990s that I think many of you in the audience will be more familiar with the history of the Dana Foundation, because this is when the foundation focused its philanthropy nearly entirely to neuroscience research and outreach, with the signature program in outreach being Brain Awareness Week, a global campaign to foster enthusiasm and support for brain science. It was also during this period in the early 2000s that the foundation provided support for a field called neuroethics that was early in its development at the time. And the Dana Foundation hosted a meeting called Neuroethics Mapping the Field, which led to the birth of the International Neuroethics Society. And then a couple of years ago in 2020, the foundation entered a new chapter in its history, focusing on the intersection of neuroscience and society. And here, as we move forward, we're focusing on education, training, and public engagement on neuroscience and society issues. So I'm going to share a bit about this today, this new focus area of ours, and what we've been hearing from scientists about the importance of considering the ethical, legal, and societal aspects of neuroscience. also talk a bit about how the Dana Foundation is catalyzing new work in these areas. And I'm going to do this with a focus toward the end on some results, some findings that we've been seeing coming from a collaboration between the Dana Foundation and Research America. This was just as of last year, and results from this survey were released in November, along with the Society for Neuroscience timing of the meeting. So I hope that there's a little bit of something for everyone in this talk. I understand that there is patients, there are researchers, there are industry members in the audience. So hopefully you'll find this to be of usefulness as you think about your own work. I'm going to share a bit about my own journey, because it has been a journey, as I was discussing with Jenny just in a couple minutes before joining this call, to understand that neuroscience advances carry significant ethical, legal, and societal implications. The first step of my own personal journey into this area was the recognition that in 2013 and onward, there were these large-scale initiatives that were being launched by countries or regions around the world. This included the US with the US Brain Initiative, Europe, Japan, and many other countries were starting to launch or design new initiatives in neuroscience. At that time, I was still at the Caroline Foundation, which played a convening and catalyst role in the US and International Brain Initiative. And all the way back now in September 2016, we had convened the leaders of these initiatives and asked about the highest priority areas that they saw as common challenges among them and potential collaborative opportunities. And you see a picture of that convening here is more than 400 people. We also had an adjacent UN General Assembly event that same day. We partnered with the NSF and State Department. There was a paper that came out not long after this meeting, and this was authored by Rafa Yuste and Corey Bargman. Many of you may be familiar with their work, very prominent in neuroscience, and this paper came out in Cell. And one excerpt from that paper was that the ethical questions raised by neurotechnologies are international questions. They can carry more ethical, legal, or social weight because the activity of our brains leads to our innermost selves. So this was really eye-opening for me, being a neuroscientist by training in the basic sciences, and then having crossed over into psychiatry research, because the most training that I had had in thinking about the ethical and societal implications were largely restricted to a module online that we took every year. But thinking much more deeply about it, this started to become much more evident to me as to why it was important. And so now let me make this a little bit more concrete and explain what neuroscientists have to navigate when they're tackling complex ethical issues in their work. I'd like to introduce you to Eddie Chang. He's chair and professor at UCSF. He's also a Brain Initiative grantee. He was featured in a 2021 New York Times article called "Tapping into the Brain to Help a Paralyzed Man Speak." And in the simplest terms, Chang is developing neurotechnology that can decode speech from brain activity. Now, there's a wonderful opportunity here because it can give a voice to people with severe paralysis and speech. Wall Street Journal with an article, "How Brain-Computer Interfaces Could Restore Speech and Help Fight Depression," also promising for those who suffer greatly from mood disorders. So as technology advances, Dr. Chang does say that someday in the future, we might be able to decode what people are thinking, which raises some really important questions about the ethics of this kind of technology. You can already see here, even as a viewer who's not a specialist in this work, that there are issues that can come up here around brain data privacy and monitoring of activity and individual control over data. Now, people like Eddie also happen to be very interested in understanding the ethical and societal implications of their work. And in all of his spare time, he is actively involved with developing neuroethics principles and user research for brain-machine interfaces. I think one takeaway from this slide that was very illuminating for me is that neuroscientists and engineers must navigate complex ethical and societal questions in their work. They don't often find training programs to help themselves, or they are trainees to think through these issues, often seeking these opportunities out individually. And also, many of these questions can't be answered by scientists alone. They require the insights of patients, end users, communities to inform on values and societal goals. So I hope that that's a concrete illustration of the kinds of things that are facing scientists today, especially in neuroscience. So now I'm going to talk about the next chapter of the Dana Foundation. We are going through a rebrand currently, so some of the visuals, including our logo, are in refinement. So our vision at the Dana Foundation is brain science for a better future. And we envision a future when neuroscience both informs and reflects society. We recognize that science can produce both salutary as well as negative effects on human well-being and flourishing. And so with this vision, our mission is to advance neuroscience that benefits society and reflects the aspirations of all people. You can see a bidirectionality there. We explore the connections between neuroscience and society's challenges and opportunities, working to maximize the potential of the field to do good. And we fulfill this mission through 3 key program pillars. The programmatic strategy for these pillars is led by the very talented Cara Ramos, who built the neuroethics component of the US Brain Initiative. Our first pillar is the Dana Education Program, where the goal is to spark interest and education around neuroscience and the many ways it interfaces with our everyday lives. I'll give an example of this program in just a moment. The Dana Next Gen program goal is to develop a new generation of interdisciplinary experts who shepherd neuroscience uses for a better world. And then the third pillar you see is the Dana Frontiers program, where the goal is to grow capacity for informed public reflection on emerging neuroscience and neurotechnology. This is the public engagement focus. And I'd also like to share the Dana Foundation's newly established values. We just confirmed these last summer, and these will all guide our work moving forward. They're very fundamental whenever we start conversations with potential grantees or stakeholders or collaborators. The first of these values is that we are bold. We think big and we seek out transformational ideas. The second is that we build trust. We strive to always act with integrity as we build relationships with partners and the public that advance shared goals and common interests. Next is that we are collaborative. We engage experts across different fields and we invite public participation. And we believe that adding these outside perspectives are going to help us to connect the dots and co-create a better future for us all. We lead with empathy. We try to understand how science can best be harnessed to improve people's lives. We value diversity. We believe neuroscience has the best chance of overcoming society's toughest challenges when it includes diverse perspectives from specialists and non-specialists. And then finally, we stay grounded. We know we don't have all the answers, so we always strive to act with humility and excitement about the unknown. As I said, these really form the bedrock of our work moving forward. We incorporate them at all levels of the foundation. For example, even when a proposal decision is made, we include not only a review to rigorously evaluate the proposal merit and alignment with our mission, but we also assess alignment with these values. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and give an example from each of these programmatic pillars. The first is coming from the Dana Education Program. So this program really grows from the roots of the foundation, our roots in education, our roots in outreach. And the signature program of the Dana Education pillar is the Brain Awareness Week program. It is an annual global education initiative with about 6,000 partners in 120 countries. And we partner very, very closely with the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies, as well as the International Brain Research Organization, to administer open calls for proposals and provide grants. Interestingly, Brain Awareness Week is actually taking place next week, so you might see a lot of activity coming through your emails, either from the Dana Foundation or our partners. We think this is a wonderful way to spread the message and inspire about the wonders of the brain and its impact on our everyday lives. Under our second pillar, the Dana Next Gen program, I'm going to give one example of a very, very recent effort that we are launching, and these are called the Dana Centers for Neuroscience and Society. This programmatic area is led by Ishan Dasgupta. Oh, I should have mentioned that the education program is led by Kathleen Rowena at the Dana Foundation as well. And last year, we launched an open request for proposals for planning grants for a Dana Center for Neuroscience and Society. We envision that these centers are going to be funded at approximately $1 million per year for 5 years. And we see that this center will be deeply committed to training to embed neuroscience in a societal context, right? We want to go beyond that module that I had talked about earlier that many neuroscientists are exposed to, go much deeper in training and education. We also see these centers launching catalytic grants for interdisciplinary work. What would it look like if a neuroscientist started working with an ethicist, a humanist, a social scientist at an early stage in their research, even at conception of that research question? And also growing future leaders. What if these people who are going through these programs could be a future director of the NIH, a future director of a research institute, and they have embedded with them a value that thinking about other disciplines that touch upon neuroscience is critical to the progress of that research. And so all in all, we see these centers acting as catalytic hubs where multidisciplinary scholars can gather to learn, to exchange ideas, to forge collaborations. We received a really robust response to this call for proposals, which was really reassuring to us because it was our first call for proposals underneath the Neuroscience and Society banner. So that showed us there was an appetite there, and it exceeded our expectations in both number and quality of ideas. And just to give you a little bit of understanding about the 11 institutions that were funded for these Dana Center planning grants, you see them here. One aspect of their proposals is that they're each completing a demonstration project that can show the spirit of the type of work that they would conduct should they have a Dana Center hosted there. All right, and now moving into the collaboration that we have with Research America. We're so excited about this. This one falls under our Frontiers pillar. This is one of our newest pillars, really, and we're developing the strategy for this program. So the overall, this area of the Frontiers is led by Paula Croxon at Dana. She was formerly at Columbia University's Zuckerman Institute as the Director of Public Programs. And we wanted to inform our strategy for public engagement as well as education efforts at Dana. And so that's how this collaboration with Research America started. In order to have an evidence-based approach to understanding what public understanding and perceptions and attitudes around neuroscience are, we had this poll to try to serve as a barometer for what these attitudes and perceptions currently are. And so the Dana Foundation did partner with Research America many years ago. I think it might have been in the early 2000s on a biomedical study, but a lot has changed in neuroscience over the past several decades, as I pointed out just with one example finding coming from Dr. Cheng's lab. And so here was our opportunity to gather a baseline as of today, and then this could help inform our work. And ideally, we also hope that the results of this survey could be helpful to other partners or stakeholders that touch upon neuroscience as they develop or refine the strategy of their own work. And so today I'm going to share with you some key learnings that we took away from this poll, and I hope these findings are relevant to this audience as well. I'd like to acknowledge from the Dana side, Kara Ramos, Paula Croxon, Ishan Dasgupta for their work in this, and from the Research America side, Mary Woolley, Ellie Dahoney, and Aaron Brown especially for their work. All right, so the first finding that I'd like to share is that we found that an overwhelming majority of Americans that we surveyed, approximately 82%, say that they or someone close to them have experienced at least one brain health condition, with depression, then Alzheimer's disease or dementia, substance use disorder or addiction, and then generalized anxiety disorder as the most frequent conditions. To some extent, I think I was expecting that the number would actually be a little bit higher than 82%, but I think there may be some that don't yet quite associate illnesses like mental illness, psychiatric conditions with brain health directly. And so this was one of the nomenclature questions that I had discussed very briefly with Jenny before this call. But this is one of the important findings that we had, is that it really touches upon people's lives. Another finding is that Americans consider brain health to be among the most important health issues. Americans rank mental health as 37% as one of the most important issues, with COVID-19 and the cost of healthcare being the first and second most cited. This finding was interesting to us because even in comparison to a national survey that was done in 2021, mental health actually surpassed both cancer and drug or opioid addiction as a top concern. And just as a reminder, this study was conducted in August 2022. And so even in a very short time frame, you see the importance of mental health really rising up that ladder in people's minds. And I think that matches what many of us are observing in our workplaces and our organizations across the country, as well as with those who are close to us. Another finding is that Americans say that they are not knowledgeable about brain health research. So in more specifics, 66% of Americans reported having little or no knowledge about brain health research. Older Americans report having the least knowledge about brain health research, and those aged 18 through 24 and 30 through 49 are more likely to say they are very or somewhat knowledgeable about brain health research. Now, this finding was illuminating to us at Dana because we have been supporting neuroscience education for nearly 3 decades, as have many other universities and organizations like Society for Neuroscience and other universities. And this shows us that much more needs to be done collectively around education. So this was very illuminating to us. And then another finding is that Americans have high levels of trust for doctors, researchers, and other health professionals as sources of brain health information. Newspapers, magazines, TV and radio, podcasts, elected officials, and social media were rated much lower. Now, in my mind, when I think about this finding in combination with the prior point about Americans not feeling knowledgeable about brain health research, health professionals could be an important entry point for greater education on brain health research. And now here is where we start to get into feelings, attitudes, emotions. What we found as well is that Americans are curious and hopeful about brain health research, although still cautious. Americans gave overwhelmingly positive responses when asked about brain research. They reported being curious, hopeful, optimistic, amazed, open about brain research, with only 1% saying that they're uninterested. Now, despite this optimism, Americans report being cautious and concerned, with African Americans more likely to say concerned than Asians or Hispanics. So there was also an oversampling of underrepresented populations in this survey to try to tease out some of those differences between populations. And then also, interestingly, respondents also have concerns, including ethical issues like misuse of brain health data due to inadequate safeguards, unwanted manipulation of brain function, and potential social stigma or discrimination against research participants. Now, this finding was relevant to us because we were curious whether public perceptions and feelings were changing in the context of neuroscience appearing in the news in different ways, including with companies and industry development. And so we were curious whether Americans still felt positively about the field and its potential to do good in the world. These findings are reassuring and to me suggest that we have a window of opportunity to foster that positive potential of neuroscience before the field might reach a controversy related to emerging science and technology, as we've seen with other fields like genetic editing, also GMOs, even thinking as far back as recombinant DNA. So I think there's a lot of lessons we can draw from history. And then I think this is the final finding that I'm going to share with the Research America community, which is that we also found that most Americans support increased investment in brain health research, with greater patient engagement being very important. So the majority of Americans believe that brain health research will have an overall benefit to society and that it is important to improving family health. And we also found that respondents believe, this is 62% believe, that patients should have more of a voice in setting research priorities. This was relevant to us because many of the calls for public engagement on ethics and societal issues in neuroscience, for example, coming from the national academies, call for more systematic, bi-directional public engagement, especially on matters that carry ethical and societal considerations. And so it was kind of a gut check in many ways. We wanted to question our assumptions and test our hypotheses about what public attitudes and perceptions may be. So we're right now taking into consideration this body of work. I've only shown a few findings here, but there were, I think, maybe 43. There was a lot of questions involved in this study. So we are still digesting them internally and also talking with other stakeholders, like those at Research America. And so one thing that I'll just leave this audience with is that I think that new approaches to education, training, research, and public engagement are needed across sectors to address ethical and societal issues in neuroscience. I think the academic sector is certainly one. I told you the story of one researcher and the need for greater training and education in neuroethics. I've also shared with you the importance of public engagement, at least briefly, public engagement with the community sector. This could include patients, end users, other local communities around societal goals and human values associated with neuroscience and neurotechnology development. I didn't really get into the government and federal sector, but there are many stakeholders here where this kind of information touches upon: the judiciary, regulators, policymakers. Private sector, many of the new technologies that are being developed will flow through the private sector, through industry. And so here is where I think industry, venture capital, philanthropy, like ourselves, are going to be very critical to help to think proactively about the ways in which neuroscience finds its way into the world. And then finally, the professional and vocational sector. I know that we had seen the finding about doctors and nurses. They could be a really critical gateway for disseminating neuroscience education. Also, journalism and media are major amplifiers for neuroscience. So all of this to say that I think it's really going to take the entire community of stakeholders to help to ensure that neuroscience can play the most positive role in the world that it can. So that was just a really brief summary of the findings. I know I went through it pretty quickly, but I hope that that gives you a flavor. I can also drop into the chat the website that you can visit to access the press release, as well as the slide deck and the executive summary. I just want to end by thanking Mary Woolley, Jenny Luray for the invitation to speak today. I want to thank all of the folks in the audience who are listening, and I hope that we can work together and find ways to partner to advance neuroscience and its role in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Montojo. I think I will be coming back on the screen. There I am. Wow, just terrific. And your work is so multifaceted. So many, patient advances will look back and try to double back on the ethical issues once that new therapeutic area is well along. But the fact that you're looking ahead and trying to anticipate these issues, I think is really important and admirable. To what extent is there an infrastructure through the bioethics community that is helping you determine, how to do this work? You clearly have some ideas. You've shared that on your slides, but I'm just curious, over the decades, what have we developed that is helping you in terms of looking at the ethics of brain research?
Yes, thank you, Jenny. That's a fantastic question, because that is also a critical question when we think about what could be helpful that we could do as a foundation. And I think that, just starting from history, I think even stemming from the work all the way back to the International Brain Initiative and thinking about the ethical issues that are arising, the large-scale initiatives, we started to first look at models that came from examples throughout history when science, ethics, and the publics intersected. And I had mentioned a few of them during my talk. You could even go back as far as nuclear energy and nuclear fission. And how did those intersections play out? And I think one of the things that we have been learning as we've been moving forward is that in drawing a connection and a translation to neuroscience, there hasn't been an infrastructure quite like what we're looking to establish for neuroscience, because I think one of the aspects that's somewhat different about what we're trying to establish is we want it to be sort of longer term and continuous, not just single or a one-off engagement. And so that longer term sort of monitoring the horizon of neuroscience development is going to be really critical because of how quickly neuroscience is changing. So I think that's one of the differences that we've found in the kind of programs we're trying to launch and the kind of platform infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, it's not necessarily just like web-based, but in terms of a community of convening. Is that it could be continuous so that it can be responsive to the changing needs and the developments in neuroscience. And so I think that that's one distinction. Now, in terms of actual convenings and bodies that exist right now that we try to draw from, the International Neuroethics Society is one of the organizations that we helped to grow in its early days, and they continue to be a close partner to us. We've also done some work with the national academies. We had a horizon scanning for neuroscience convening last year. So we're trying to figure out which set of partners can we draw upon and partner with in order to create this infrastructure for horizon scanning. And I think what we're noticing, it's probably going to take many in this community because the issues that are facing neuroscience are so multifaceted. You have sometimes conceptual issues that need to be discussed, sometimes the state of the science issues, but then sometimes science communication, public engagement, and terminology issues are things that need to be discussed. So it's still a vision that we're building, but we're starting to see that right now with specific projects with organizations.
Well, no doubt other fields will be taking a page out of your book as you move forward. You mentioned terminology, and we were talking earlier about how, because this is such a new area in many ways, the language is multifaceted, and also different terms are thrown around that may or may not encompass the field. Brain science, neuroscience, mental health, and why is that important? Is it important that we develop some consensus around terminology? Can you talk a little bit about the nomenclature and why that is important?
Yes, thank you, Jenny, for that question. I think that this touches upon the finding in the survey around education, and that many Americans report having little to no knowledge about brain health research. I think that one of the potential reasons for that number being as, I guess, low as I would perceive it to be, is that there might be some confusion about the different terminology that's used to describe research on the brain in both health and disease. And so, as you just listed, there are many different terms that people can use: brain science, neuroscience, mental health, neurotechnology, brain technology. And then along with that, there's all of these more newer terms like brain organoids. Where does that fit in to brain research? Is that considered to be under the same umbrella? And so my thought on this is still evolving as far as whether the field needs a unified terminology. I was just on a call last week with some folks who were pointing to the American Association of Neurology, the AAN, where they utilize a term of brain health. And so, that's one framework. And I think one question in the spirit of taking into consideration public perceptions around brain science is, where do these terms meet people where they are? And so I think there's still some social sciences research that needs to be done on the type of terminology that resonates most closely with people. Mm-hmm. If I say brain science, will you also associate that with mental health? I think that that's an open question. When I think about my own family members, if I say brain health, they might not recognize it's also, mental illness could be encompassed within there. And so, so I think that this is a very, very important question, and it relates to education and awareness of brain research and the role that it plays in our lives. And that's where I think it becomes really important.
And it also can help to remove certain stigmas as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'm going to call on my colleague Jacqueline because we have a flurry of audience questions. Jacqueline.
Yes, thanks, Jenny. And thank you, Dr. Montojo, for this fabulous presentation, very eye-opening. So first question from the audience is, Dana Foundation looking at mental health effects of long COVID and related illnesses, ME/CFS? Any work supported on vagal nerve stimulation?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think this is such an important area, and I think it was Scientific American that just came out with a whole feature on long COVID and effects on the brain of long COVID. So at the Dana Foundation, as I had mentioned, we're still in this early stage of exploring the specific verticals, or I guess you can even call them horizontals across these programmatic pillars. And one of the ones that we started on first was neural organoids. And I think one of the learnings that we've had, because we're trying to identify these hot spots in neuroscience that are really facing the larger population, is that mental illness is one that rose so high, even just over the course of 2021 to 2022. So this is an area, at least in my mind, from the results of that study, that I'm seeing as being very, very high priority areas. And so I think when we think about long COVID, when we think about maybe the connection to mental illness, there are a lot of aspects of mental illness that are coming to light right now, including with youth mental illness, that struggle. And so I think that would be one area that we can look more deeply into. And then I should also say that we look closely at what our partners on the federal funding agency side are doing. So if they're launching long COVID initiatives, what are the areas where the Dana Foundation can make a unique contribution to that? And it may be in the realm of areas underneath those programmatic pillars I mentioned. It may be more squarely in education. It may also be in patient engagement. So engaging with patients with long COVID, for example.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Will Dana support fundamental and/or translational clinical neuroscience research? Do you have a horizontal goal for achievement in the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline. Yeah, so for the question about supporting fundamental and/or translational clinical neuroscience research, the Dana Foundation had a research program that was focused in these two areas. Actually, the fundamental research was focused on neuroimaging back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when the field was just starting to blossom. And we've actually, over in 2020, just sunset our support for seed grants for fundamental translational and clinical research. And one of the reasons for this was a gap analysis to understand what is now being funded more robustly than it was in the past, and what areas are really underlooked at or, but in critical need. And so this is where we came to sunset those research grants, with the understanding that the Dana Foundation's new work in neuroscience and society can be adjacent to that. So if there is fundamental research, if there is translational or clinical neuroscience research that's taking place, is there an opening to have an ethicist, a humanist, a social scientist, a public engagement specialist collaborate with them at early stages? So that's more of our realm right now. And then to the question of a horizontal goal for achievement in the next 5 to 10 years, yeah, we do, and it's kind of different for each of our pillars. So one example with our Dana Next Gen program, so this is the most recent and first RFP that we launched. We really hope to see that there's going to be a new body of work that links together neuroscience and some of these other fields that have not traditionally been supported, either due to departmental silos due to a lack of funding for them, maybe even due to a lack of an academic community for these specialists to meet each other. And so I think growing new work in these areas, also having pathways for dissemination of that work, we notice that even if that work is happening, that having venues to publish or share those in can be very difficult because they don't fit into a neat box in a specific scientific journal. And so I think that new work, disseminating that work, and then also, maybe this is more on the 10-year time frame, but being able to have examples where having community engagement, patient or end user engagement will find its way back. Those findings will find their way back into the research setting itself so that they can influence how research questions are asked, how research priorities are set, or even how research is interpreted. So that might be more of a 10-year goal because you need to have the systems and the communities, trusting communities involved in order for that to happen. But those are some examples of it, but it is definitely sort of titrated by the goal of the program, education versus next gen versus our frontiers pillar.
Great.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Given that philanthropy can play a large role in setting research directions, how are you thinking about including patient and civic society's voice in programs you develop and fund?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline. We recognize that philanthropy is one of many different stakeholders in a broader research enterprise ecosystem. And it is an important stakeholder in that ecosystem. A few reasons for that is because philanthropy can act at early stages on projects with relatively higher risk. And it can also take approaches that might be more cross-disciplinary or might take into consideration public engagement, public goals, societal goals, and human values. So those are some of the areas where philanthropy can be really important in these kinds of issues. And so the way in which we see the Dana Foundation being involved in that is that we first need an entry point to those patient groups and the patient community. And we see ourselves working with partners like Research America, American Brain Coalition. There's also a very interesting network called the Neurotech Network. And all of these communities offer that opportunity to engage more directly with patient groups. And I think we see ourselves first launching pilots in this area because we need to test new models for bidirectional engagement. And then should those work, then we can start to scale into other communities. So yes, absolutely. I think that philanthropy has a really special role to play in closer engagement with patient groups.
All right, well, I think I'm going to jump in for a couple of last questions. In terms of that community engagement, do you think early career scientists have a role to play in that work?
I do. I really do, Jenny. And I feel very passionately about this area because I really think that what we see in our engagement with the scientific community, and I'll just draw from a really recent example at the Society for Neuroscience. We ran Ishan Dasgupta, Kara Ramos, Paula Croxon, Kathleen Rowena at the Dana Foundation helped to put together this this social for trainees that are interested in the intersection of neuroscience and society. And I can't tell you how robust the interest was in this area. And it really seems bottom up. It really seems to me like this next generation of neuroscientists, maybe even scientists I don't interact with as many on outside of neuroscience as I do inside, but they seem to be very attuned to the impacts, the potential impacts that their work may have on society. And this spans from the basic sciences all the way through to the translational and clinical and applied sciences. I think that natural bottom-up momentum in their motivation and even their inspiration for entering the field of neuroscience is something to really pay attention to and that we feel. And so I think that the next generation of neuroscientists not only has a role to play, but I think they have an appetite to play a greater role in things like science communication, public engagement, and education and training on neuroscience and society issues, which is, I think, the best combination, right? You want to be able to harness the natural interests of trainees. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's obviously a big priority of Research Americas and others.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you for that. One last question. Brain Awareness Week. Where can people find resources? And one person wants to know in particular where they can find resources on neuroethics.
Oh my goodness, that's a wonderful question. Very near and dear to my heart. So with regard to Brain Awareness Week, in terms of resources, generally, I'm going to talk about resources generally, and then we can move into neuroethics. Generally, definitely going through one of 3 different areas, depending on your geographical region, is recommended. So if you are someone who is interested in organizing a Brain Awareness Week campaign event in the European sector, definitely go to FENS, and there's an annual open call for that. For anywhere else outside of Europe, that would be IBRO, that International Brain Research Organization that I mentioned earlier. And then the third is the Dana Foundation. So the Dana Foundation also acts as both a coordinator and a funder of Brain Awareness Week. So you can find a lot of modules for Brain Awareness Week activities on our website. Now, to the neuroethics component, this is something that we're really interested in. And one of our first grants actually made under the Neuroscience and Society umbrella when I first arrived was to the National Informal STEM Education Network to develop new modules for bidirectional learning-oriented engagement with public sectors. At first K through 12, though they're also looking at models that are geared toward an older age range. And they've created some really fascinating new modules. We actually just tested them out at the Dana Foundation a couple of weeks ago, and they were both thought-provoking and fun, and very much in the realm of sort of balancing expertise that comes from lived experience, right? So it's not like you have to be an expert in neuroscience in the room to be able to comment on some of these critical neuroethics issues. And so they've been developing new modules. And so we're looking at ways to intersect some of their work with our work in Brain Awareness Week, because it would lend itself really nicely to new modules that are more focused on neuroethics questions. Yeah, so thank you for that question.
Well, Dr. Montojo, I can't thank you enough. Your presentation and your discussion, your thoughtfulness, really, really terrific. We enjoyed working with you and your team on the survey, and we're so pleased it's receiving attention from NIH, from the Bioethics Institute at Johns Hopkins and elsewhere. And for our audience, you can find all of our surveys, well, the entire survey we commissioned in partnership with the Dana Foundation. Erin put a link into the chat earlier. She'll put a link in again. And if you go to that link, you'll actually see many of our partner surveys. And if you're interested in those, please reach out to us. You can reach out to us through Joel, and we would love to talk about working with you on those. So that's all we have time for today. I'm just going to make a quick announcement, which is we hope you'll join us next week on Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern for our next Alliance member only discussion. We'll be joined by Emily Holubowicz, who is the National Senior Vice President for Federal Affairs at the American Heart Association. She is going to be joining us to look at the president's funding levels for NIH. We're going to be getting a skinny budget very shortly, as well as our nation's other research and public health agency funding levels. And we'll also be talking about the FY24 appropriations outlook. So look for the registration in your inboxes if you're a member. Thank you again, Dr. Montojo, and thank you to our audience for a really vibrant and important conversation.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you to the audience as well.